Dead Air Studios presents The Pain Chaser 1, Ambuscade, by Patrick E. Malloy, read for you by the author. This recording is released under a Creative Commons 4.0 license, so feel free to share it with your friends or enemies, but always give appropriate credit. This story is not intended for children and contains profanity, violence, and disturbing content that some people may find offensive. If you're in doubt, please turn back now, as you may find that some doors, once opened, refuse to be shut. Nine. The loud crashing on the other side of the door, which had up to that point been coming at regular intervals, suddenly stopped as abruptly as it had begun. It was impossible to tell if the thing that had been trying to break through was still there. The small company of fire inspectors did not move. And when a knock came a minute later, Tabby actually cried out.
"Why can't you leave us alone?"
She yelled at the door. "No, wait," Anton said. I think that was someone else." The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a voice. "This is the police. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, open the door." The four actually broke into laughter as Rob hastened to pull back the brace and open the door. Two officers stood in the doorway, glancing at them wonderingly. One tall and thin, the other stocky and broad-shouldered. The larger man was carrying a fire axe at his side. "What the hell happened in here?" asked the broad, larger cop, looking at the ruined door frame in amazement. "Did some kind of animal do this?" "We don't know," Rob told him. "Did you see anyone else? Something was literally trying to tear the door down to get to us." "Christ," the other cop said under his breath, and they both stepped from the hallway into the room.
"How did you get in?"
Tabby asked them, beaming with relief. "Helicopter landed on the roof," the thin man told her. "If no one is hurt, we can begin moving you all up there. But first, can someone tell me what's been going on here?" Rob let out a long sigh. He punctuated with an embarrassing grin. "It's kind of strange."
"Kind of?"
Tabby asked in mock amusement. "You can tell us about it in the chopper," the stocky officer said. "Yeah, it's not really safe here," Rob said. As they made their way out of the room and into the hallway, Annie turned back to retrieve the claustrum. Rob noticed her picking it up and picked up the unbroken silver spider as well. "Good idea," he said. "The police are probably going to want to see this stuff as well as the book."
"It's not just that,"
Annie remarked, shaking her head.
"The book said that the claustrum was important to the vessel in some way. That it contains the essence of the pain god. I don't think we should let him get his hands on it."
"You don't actually believe that, though, do you?" he asked her.
"I don't want to,"
she said simply. She looked at the claustrum with some apprehension. After a moment, she wrapped it in one of the loose bed sheets they'd left behind. She thought it was vital that they take it with them, but she didn't like to look at it. It made her feel uneasy. She recalled what Henry had told her earlier that week in their bedroom. He'd said that when he was inside the school, he could feel a sort of heartbeat. It made his eyes water and his gums itch. She wondered if the claustrum had touched him as well, reaching out like some kind of malicious radio broadcast. She pushed the idea from her head and followed the others out into the hall. Here they were treated to another shock. The hallways that they'd been navigating all night now looked different. This wasn't some sort of trick of the light. The locker banks, which previously were painted fresh pale green, were now old-looking and flecked with rust. The floor tiles had changed completely, not just in their apparent age, but to a completely different pattern. "What the fuck?" Anton said as he looked about. "What?" the cops asked almost in unison. "This is a new building," Anton told them. "It didn't look like this before." "Doesn't look new to me," the broad-shouldered cop remarked. "This just keeps getting weirder and weirder," Rob said. Annie ran her fingers along the rusted surface of the locker nearest her. The paint flecked off in chips. She found that her disbelief left her all at once. She knew that she should be as shocked as the others appeared to be, but in fact, this newest oddity only solidified her growing belief that something supernatural was happening. She knew instinctively that it was all true, that the thing pursuing them was no man but some kind of insane monster. The strange, carefully wrapped pyramid in her hand indeed held the essence of some sort of Lovecraftian pain god. She would not admit this out loud, but she felt sure of it just the same. The cops, who did not seem concerned with the state of the building, led them slowly through the halls. As they went, the others marveled at the changes that had taken place while they were locked in the lounge. The shapes and locations of windows had changed. The same went for the sprinkler systems and light fixtures. Annie knew that what she was seeing was the school as it had been, before the fire that had destroyed it the first time. Somehow things were reverting, as if the past was scratching through to the present. She wondered if a place could have a ghost, if a town could be haunted by the shared horror of the past. The thought sent a shudder up her spine that made the hairs stand up on the back of her neck. The police led them up a stairwell that led to the second floor. Here, things remained unchanged. The effect was apparently happening a bit at a time. They walked down one hallway and took another set of stairs that led to the building's roof. For the first time since the beginning of their trip into the heart of Kettle Creek, sunlight broke through the dark clouds as they stepped from the stairwell onto the school's roof. The door opened after some effort, pushing back the wall of snow and slush that had built up against it. But the two officers had brushed most of that aside when they come this way before. It appeared that they'd shoveled their way to the door, creating two walls of snow on either side of the rooftop. The helicopter stood like a symbol of life in this dark place, daylight dancing across its polished white surface. It was like the right hand of God come to lift them safely from this frozen hell. They approached as a huddled group, trudging through the melted snow, the two cops leading. Gone was the biting wind of the previous night. The feeling of claustrophobia that had followed them seemed to lift away like a curtain. They were going home, and each of them vowed silently never to step foot in Kettle Creek again. It would be hard enough in the days to come to live with the memory of what they'd shared. Ahead were still questions about what had happened to Steve Murray. The story seemed ludicrous, even to those who'd lived through it. Luckily, they had the strange book and the artifacts that would prove their words. Annie watched as the cops opened the helicopter door, thinking to herself that the great flying machine looked much smaller in real life than in the movies. The broad-shouldered cop leaned against it and let out a gasp of surprise. "What the hell?" he asked his partner. Annie felt an icy hand of fear clutch her heart. Rob immediately ran forward to push past the thin officer. "What do you mean, what the hell?" he asked, his wavering voice a mirror of the dread she was feeling. The cops pushed Rob back, but he wouldn't be deterred. "What's going on?" he persisted. "Somebody wrecked the copter," the thin cop said. "Pulled the controls right out of the cockpit." "How is that even possible?" the other cop remarked. "Do you know how strong you would have to be to do something like that?"
What?
Tabby yelled in undisguised panic. The two cops stepped aside so that the others could see the damage. As stated, something had torn the cyclic stick right out of the floor, as well as leaving the instrument panel in tatters. Torn metal, plastic, and exposed wires were strewn everywhere.
"Can you fix it?"
Tabby asked. "What the hell did they use to do this kind of damage?" the thin cop was asking his partner, ignoring her. "It looks like someone took a friggin' jackhammer to it."
"Can you fix it?"
she asked again, louder this time. "Lady, I'm not a mechanic," the broad-shouldered cop told her in annoyance. "Christ, look at this," the thinner cop said, ushering his partner around to the other side of the chopper. "Even the gas tank's been punctured. Whoever did this wanted to make damn sure we weren't going to fly out of here." The broad-shouldered cop let out a long whistle and came around to face the other four, who were obviously growing impatient. "I think it's time you told us what the hell's been happening here," he said. "We got a call saying we need to take a helicopter in and pick up some people who are trapped in the Kettle Creek High School. Possibly being stalked by somebody dangerous. And now the helicopter's torn apart by something that could pull a solid steel rod clean through an inch of solid metal. Who are you people?" So they explained what had transpired up to that point. Anton did most of the talking, explaining the strange circumstances of Steve's death and how it seemed to him to echo the bodies found 40 years earlier in the tunnels underneath the town. "We didn't see any body when we were landing the copter," the broad-shouldered cop commented, "but it might have been covered over if it was still snowing at the time." Anton told them about the note and the strange book, at which point Rob took up the narrative, telling them how he and Annie had found the passage in the basement and the peculiar things they found inside. Anton handed the book and the mechanical spider over to them to collaborate the story. The cops took turns studying each with identical looks of incredulity. "You said there were more of these things down there?" the broad-shouldered cop asked him. "Dozens," Rob said. "We're not going back down there, are we?" Tabby asked. "No," the broad-shouldered officer said at once. "If there really is someone dangerous still on the premises, our first priority is to make sure you're all safe. We'll get a team over here later to check out this strange room." Tabby looked noticeably relieved. "I would suggest, however, that we do make our way back inside and find somewhere we can better defend ourselves, in case this killer comes back. The radio equipment was torn apart with everything else in the chopper, and it could be a while before the station decides to send someone along to see why we haven't reported in. Even longer to get clearance for a second chopper." Annie felt her blood turn to ice at the thought of going back inside the school, when freedom had seemed so near. At least the cops had guns. That was a bit more in the way of protection than they had before. Rob nodded and extended his hand to the broad-shouldered cop. "I'm Rob," he said. "I figure if we're going to be stuck here together for the time being, we might as well know each other's names. This is Anton, Tabby, and Annie." The big man grasped his hand firmly, giving him a warm smile. "I'm Officer Phil Dodson. This is my partner, Dave Archer. Don't worry, Rob. We're going to get you out of here in one piece. I know the crap you've been through today is pretty weird. I'm having a hard time believing some of it myself, but we're all going to be okay." Rob nodded. "Okay. Let's go back inside before we all freeze to death." The new Kettle Creek High School was very similar in design to the original, having been built on the foundation of the original construction. It was an obvious choice just to model the new school on the old designs. There were very few differences, and most of those were minor aesthetic changes. In fact, the only significant change between the two designs was a large clock tower over the front entrance that doubled as a study hall. The new school used electronic bells and had no need for the archaic structure, so it was left out. Beneath the school, the foundation began to shake and crack apart as the old clock tower began to push its way up from the earth. Shafts and gears grew out of nothing, blooming like the petals of exotic metal flowers before finding each other and meshing. The ceiling split and shrank back to make room for the growing spire, spilling snow into the hole as it rose to fill the space. Piece by piece, Kettle Creek was taking back what it remembered. As the party of 6 made their way back to the second-floor corridor, they were thrown to the floor by what to them felt like an earthquake. Tabby crashed down the last 4 stairs, taking Officer Archer right off his feet. Both of them fell bonelessly to the floor. Tabby groaned in pain, touching a bleeding spot on her lip where she had bitten down. They rose to find themselves face to face with the thing that had murdered Steve Murray. It stood 3 yards away, regarding them with a look of childlike curiosity. If Steve could have seen what they were seeing, he would have known instantly that what had attacked him was no man. It was humanoid, but the proportions were twisted and stretched. It stood over 7 feet tall, with a strange look of a powerfully muscular man that had been stretched like a piece of taffy. It wore a short-sleeved jumpsuit and boots too big for any human man. Its arms were wrapped in dirty gray bandages that hid long, snake-like muscles. They trailed almost to the floor in the manner of some mutant gorilla and ended in crooked hands tipped in blunted black claws. Its right hand was still wet with Steve's blood. Strangest of all was the creature's head. It appeared to be wearing some kind of elongated black mask. The mask made the thing's head look like an earless dog, or the jackal-headed god Anubis from Egyptian myth. It was featureless save for 2 huge, empty, round glass holes. No eyes could be seen looking out. "What the fuck is that?" Phil asked, scrambling for his gun. "I have no clue," Rob said. His look of terror was reflected in everyone else's face. Tabby tried to find her feet, but seemed to have lost the use of her legs. Dave had regained his composure, however, and had his gun trained on the strange creature. Phil followed in suit, taking careful aim and leaning on the axe he held to steady him. "Is that a person?" Dave asked no one in particular. The thing cocked its head at them like a curious dog, but made no attempt to come forward. "Put your hands up!" Phil yelled at it.
"I don't think it understands you,"
Annie said in a low, frightened voice. Put your fucking hands up now, he bellowed. It gazed at him emotionlessly with those hollow eye holes and began to walk slowly forward. I can't fucking shoot it. It's not armed, Dave said, lowering his gun slightly. What do you call those huge claws on its hands? Anton asked him. That thing's not friggin' human. Fuck! Phil spat and squeezed off around. It found its mark, piercing the thing's shoulder with a force that would have spun a normal man on his heel and dropped him where he stood. A spray of dark red blood exploded out its back, but the creature hardly seemed to take notice at all. It came forward with incredible speed at its attacker, catching him around the middle and catapulting him into the air. Phil struck the locker bank with bone-crushing force and crumpled to the ground. The axe spun harmlessly away across the floor. The thing was on him again in a blink. It lifted him with one claw and held him at arm's length as if he were nothing more than a doll. He struggled in vain, hand clutching at the claw clamped around his throat, legs kicking out wildly. The other claw came across his face in a mighty swipe. Phil's face disappeared above the mouth, leaving nothing but a gaping, gore-filled hole. The thing let Phil fall to the floor, where his mouth opened and closed twice before his dying brain finally gave up. The others watched this all happen in the space of a couple of seconds, fear rooting them to the ground. But when the creature turned its eyeless gaze on them, they snapped out of the trance. Anton found that his feet were in motion before he was even aware that he was running. At that moment, his mind would not allow him to process what he had just witnessed. He knew only blind terror, and that he must get away from the thing that he was sure would be following. He was vaguely aware that someone was running next to him, but he neither knew nor cared who that person might be. He came to the end of the hall and crashed through the stairwell doors. He took the stairs 3 and 4 at a time. Once he was at the bottom floor, he threw himself flat against the wall, breathing heavily, forced to realize that he did not know where he was running to. David Archer came to a stop at his side. The two took a quick look and noticed that they were now alone. Now what? Anton asked him. You're asking me? The cop laughed. I just saw a monster rip my partner's face off. You know a lot more about what's going on here than I do. But you're a cop, Anton said, as if the Force trained them for this type of situation. Archer had nothing to say to this statement. Okay, Anton sighed. You said there would be a second helicopter, right? Yeah, should be, Dave agreed. But it could be hours before we hear anything. In the meantime, we should find a safe place to hide out. Anton was shaking his head. There isn't one. We tried that once already. A door won't hold long against this thing. Locking yourself in a room is like a death trap. Look, just what the fuck is that thing? Dave asked him, whirling on his heel suddenly. Anton shrugged. The vessel, maybe? Who knows? Read the book if you want. He offered the tome to the cop. It has a lot to say on the subjects of pain and torture. Didn't once mention a monster that tears people's faces off. No, I'm good just now, said the cop, rising to his full height and replacing his gun in his holster, which had been clutched in his hand until that very moment. I think we should get moving. You might be right about there being no safe place in the school, but I'm sure just sitting here and talking about it isn't going to make our chances any better. Better to stay on the move. Maybe we can find the others, Anton suggested. Maybe, the cop agreed and began walking. Anton struggled to keep up, clutching his side. The cop was obviously in much better physical shape, but Anton thought he would only embarrass himself by complaining or asking the other to slow his pace. Regardless, they combed the bottom floor of the school quickly, seeing no sign of any of the others. It was odd how much the halls had changed. Even the smell inside the school was different, older, more worn in. The real shock came when Dave and Anton arrived in the hallway leading to the entrance. The new, old clock tower rose from the ground, blocking the entrance and piercing the ceiling above. At its bottom, it was a thick, shapeless shaft that slowly took form as it rose into its new place in the ceiling. Even stranger, it seemed to writhe and pulsate as it climbed, like some great worm, like something alive. The pair stopped in their tracks, coming up short and staring at the obstacle wordlessly. As they watched, the last of the new tower squirmed free from the gaping hole where it hung inches from the floor. The floor beneath pulled itself tight as it did, cracks mending and tiles shifting back into position, showing no sign of its passing. As the mass lifted away from the floor, it took on the color and texture of red brick. I think that has got to be one of the strangest things I've ever seen, Dave remarked. The building is changing, Anton said. It's reverting. How is that possible? Dave asked him. I'm not sure it is, Anton said. We have to get the hell out of here. Whatever's going on here, it's getting worse. If you're listening to this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And if you like what you've heard so far, please consider supporting my Patreon. I try to do this for free, but I do have to support myself somehow. Also, physical copies of my books are available